you truly living your life, or just repeating one that was programmed for you? There's a kind of prison that has no bars, no lock, no guards. It presents itself as normal, disguises itself as routine, and slowly wears us down, like water patiently carving through stone. Waking up at the same time, drinking the same coffee, fulfilling the same obligations, smiling when it's expected, coming home exhausted and still feeling like you haven't really lived. There's something deeply strange about all this, but most people don't allow themselves to think about it, because thinking hurts and seeing is dangerous. The problem is that automatism doesn't just control our gestures, it empties us from within. We slowly forget to ask why, to question what we're doing with the little time we've been given. We start to believe that being an adult means settling, that growing up means accepting life as it is, that rebellion is for teenagers. And then, silently, the spirit shrinks until it fits inside a badge, a bill, a glowing screen. But something in us still resists, a sense of strangeness that creeps in during the afternoon, like an intrusive thought, a quiet rage that appears out of nowhere, an inexplicable urge to walk away from it all, even if we're not sure what it all really is. That's not weakness, that's clarity trying to be born. It's as if the soul is whispering between the gears, this isn't everything. This isn't about demonizing routine. There's beauty in repetition when it's conscious, when it serves life and not servitude. What we're challenging here isn't habit itself, but the way it can turn us into functional shadows, obedient, predictable. And the cruelest part is that this prison wasn't built by tyrants. We built it ourselves, fueled by the fear of seeming inadequate, sustained by an unconscious desire to be accepted, even if it costs us our authenticity. The first act of freedom isn't always about changing everything at once. Sometimes it's just looking at what we call life with suspicion, not to destroy it, but to finally inhabit it, with presence, with strangeness, with courage. We were taught that a person's worth lies in what they produce, that only the exhausted deserve rest, that only the useful deserve to exist. From an early age, we associate our value with performance, grades, goals, results. And when we finally grow up, the game doesn't stop. The tests just change names. Now they're deadlines, reports, deliverables. Living becomes an endless evaluation. Productivity became a morality, a silent dogma that separates the worthy from the lazy, the strong from the fragile, the winners from the irrelevant. And the cruelest part is that the punishment doesn't come from outside. We whip ourselves with guilt for resting, with anxiety for not being productive, with shame for stopping. Idleness became a crime, slowness, a flaw, a pause, a threat. But what exactly are we producing? And for whom? At what cost? The exhaustion you feel isn't just in your body, it's in your soul. A kind of burnout that sleep can't fix because it doesn't come from lack of energy. It comes from a lack of meaning. Too much productivity drains the depth out of experience. It turns us into tools that function well, but no longer know how to feel. Georges Bataille saw this clearly. He realized that our modern obsession with usefulness was killing what's most human in us, that we weren't born to function, we were born to overflow, to live experiences that serve no purpose other than themselves. And that's exactly what was taken from us. The right to do something without justification, without spreadsheets, without validation. Life was reduced to a means to pay bills, to reach goals, to become someone. But no one tells you what happens when you get there. And you know why? Because there is no there. The finish line is always moving. The system needs you to keep running. Because if you stop, you begin to feel. And if you feel, you begin to see. The illusion of productivity isn't just a practical issue. It's an existential blow. It's the replacement of real life with an endless simulation of importance. And the most radical act you can take today may be the exact opposite of what's expected from you: to sit down, to breathe, and to do nothing. Just to be. Just to exist. Because that, more than anything, is unbearable to a world that only sees value in outcomes. Some people live in constant restlessness and don't know why. They feel like something's wrong but can't quite name it. They wake up with dread, walk around anxious, go to sleep with a hollow emptiness, no matter how much they try to fill it. To others, they may seem strange, overly sensitive, but in truth, they're just the ones who haven't fully numbed themselves yet. They feel everything more deeply, more intensely, more vividly. This discomfort that follows you, this chronic sense of not fitting in, it might be the most honest thing about you, because it means something inside you is still awake, something that refuses to accept this life as the only possibility, something that still hears itself, even through the noise of the world. You're not broken, you're awake. Society, with its rush and ready-made answers, loves to turn genuine discomfort into pathology, to say your pain is a disorder, that your sadness is just a chemical imbalance, that your doubt is a lack of focus. But what if it's the opposite? What if your anguish is the clearest sign that your soul is trying to come home? What if anxiety is just a modern name for an ancient thirst for freedom? Georges Bataille never asked us to be happy, stable, or well-adjusted. He knew that human existence is, by nature, unstable, paradoxical, deeply felt. And trying to tame that with routine, productivity, and toxic positivity is like burying alive the truest parts of ourselves. Discomfort isn't a flaw, it's a flash of clarity. Behind the boredom, the dissatisfaction, the vague unease, there's a part of you that refuses to die quietly, a part that knows, even without words, that this manufactured life isn't enough, that there is something more, something that can't be bought, can't be explained, and can't be reduced to goals and obligations. And that's why it hurts, because the soul longs for something it's never had, but always sensed. Accepting this discomfort as legitimate is the first step toward reconnecting with your true self. Not to improve, not to function better, but simply to be. And that is exactly what the system fears. A human being who stops trying to fit in and starts to exist. Georges Bataille didn't write to please. He wrote to disturb. His philosophy is like a cracked mirror. When you try to see yourself in it, something shatters, and what's left is more truthful than any polished image could ever be. He didn't want to reform the world. He wanted to open wounds, to show that human existence, at its deepest core, does not bow to utility, logic, or order. Because for him, to live was not about balance, it was about excess. Bataille dared to say what few had the courage to, that life doesn't have to serve a purpose. That meaning lives in the overflow, in the excess, in what doesn't fit. To a world obsessed with control and function, that's a threat. But to those who feel that something is wrong with the way we live, his words sound like a whisper of freedom. While most thinkers try to organize chaos, Bataille dives into it, because he understands that there is wisdom in the abyss, clarity in the vertigo. He speaks of death, of eroticism, of the sacred, not as isolated concepts, but as experiences that rip through the skin of normality and reveal what lies beneath. And what's there isn't pretty, isn't comfortable, but it's real. And that is enough. To him, the human being is not a functional project. It's a field of tension between the desire to control and the urge to let go, between labor and laughter, between productivity and pointless expenditure. Bataille believed there was something sacred in waste, because only what has no use can truly be free. Only the gesture that expects no return can touch the absolute. His philosophy doesn't offer solutions. It's an invitation to surrender, to abandon the idea that everything, including our own existence, must be justified. And in today's world, that's more radical than any revolution. Because breaking the logic of utility means breaking the most invisible chains, the ones that keep our souls domesticated. When we read Bataille, something stirs inside us, as if an ancient voice, long silenced, were whispering, "You don't need a purpose to be here. You just need to be whole, to feel, until it hurts, to live until it overflows. And deep down, that's what's so terrifying, realizing that life doesn't require justification, only presence. We live inside an invisible structure that shapes even our moments of freedom. Modern society is a subtle architecture of control, so finely tuned it no longer needs walls. It lives inside us, in the ideas we accept as truths, in the desires we believe we chose, in the way we interpret what it means to live well. Even our free time, which should be a space for breathing, is transformed into yet another stage in the machinery. It has to be productive, profitable, aesthetically pleasing. Rest becomes content. Pause becomes performance. In this setting, the human being no longer lives. They merely function. Every day, there's a role to play, a task, an expectation, an image to maintain. Life empties of presence and fills with obligations. And the worst part is that we've learned to call this normal. We've learned to feel guilty when we're not producing, to judge ourselves as useless when we're not in motion, to measure our worth by how functional we are, and to forget that being human, by definition, is to be contradictory, unfinished, untamed. Bataille saw this domestication clearly. To him, modern civilization built a dangerous illusion that everything must have an end, a use, a measurable outcome. But there's something in us that escapes that, a part that wants to get lost, laugh without reason, love without possession, live without having to explain. That part is being suffocated, silenced, forgotten, in the name of efficiency, order, and progress. That's why so many people feel a nameless emptiness. Because modern structure doesn't just organize the outer world, it reorganizes our inner one. It teaches us to feel guilt for being useless, shame for not measuring up, fear for not fitting in. And little by little, we begin to disappear. We don't die all at once. We fade slowly, erased in the name of adaptation. But there is a breaking point, a moment when the soul, suffocated, refuses to go on as just another number. A day when you look around and everything seems perfectly wrong. A moment when obedience starts to make you sick. And that is when the possibility of freedom is born, not as escape, but as a return to yourself, to what pulses behind the mask, to what's still wild. Not everything in us has been tamed. Despite the years of obedience, of education meant to make us fit, of rules we pretended to accept, something inside still slips through, something that doesn't settle, that refuses to accept the world as it is. This part doesn't have a clear name, but it shows up sometimes, when you laugh for no reason, when you cry looking at the sky, when you long for something you've never lived. It's there, dormant, like a sleeping animal, and no matter how much they try to train it, it won't die. It waits. That wild part reminds us that we are human before we are useful, that we are instinct before we are resume, that we weren't born to be correct, efficient, or controlled. We were born to feel, to get lost, to be pierced by life, even if it confuses us, scares us, breaks us open, because deep down, that's where authenticity lives. But the modern world fears what cannot be calculated. It wants predictability, productivity, appearance. It silences the scream with diagnoses, the tears with distractions, the longing with goals. And that's why the wild part must hide. It survives in the in-between, in silence, in a sigh, in a chill that comes out of nowhere, in a gaze that drifts far away. Bataille doesn't invite us to destroy the world, but to remember what the world tries to erase. And nothing is more subversive than embracing what in us is still untamable. That impulse that doesn't fit the rules. That emotion that rises without asking permission. That gesture that serves no purpose, but says everything. When we laugh without a reason or cry without explanation, it's that part, untouched, true, free. To accept that part of yourself is not to regress. It's to remember, to recall a time when we lived with our whole bodies, when touch wasn't a risk, but a language, when time wasn't a resource, but presence, when love wasn't a transaction, but surrender. And it still can be. Not as an escape, but as a choice. A difficult choice, but an urgent one, to live with the wholeness that the world tried to take from us. For Bataille, waste wasn't a mistake. It was a silent revolt against the logic of utility. He didn't see the sacred in cathedrals, but in useless moments. In things that can't be monetized, sold, or measured. When you dance without an audience. When you write with no intention of sharing. When you simply observe the world without trying to do anything with it. In that moment, you're outside the system. You are excess. And because of that, you are alive. We're bombarded with the idea that everything must lead somewhere. Even art has become strategy. Love, an investment, friendship, a support network. But there's value in the gesture that expects nothing in return. Salvation might be hidden in what escapes control, sitting in the sun for no reason, listening to the same song for the 1000th time, spending an afternoon just watching life on the street. These moments, dismissed as frivolous, might actually be the deepest, because they belong entirely to us. The system fears waste because it's useless, and what is useless cannot be controlled. That's why choosing to waste time can be one of the most radical acts today. Time lost with authenticity is, in fact, time reclaimed from alienation. A gesture made freely, without interest or goal, is a reminder that something in us is still untamed, that something has not surrendered. It's in this small space, between action and the world, between feeling and duty, that something even deeper begins to emerge. The suspicion that our identity has long been confused with what we do. It's time to ask if we still know who we are without the titles, the roles, the tasks. And from that space, an unsettling question arises. What if we've been misled about who we are? Not with malice, but subtly, through the words we heard as children, the demands of our time, the constant association between value and performance. Slowly, we stopped being presence and became a role. We began answering questions about who we are with job titles, credentials, achievements. The who was swallowed by the what. And then, when the work stops, when the role disappears, when the activity falls silent, the emptiness shows up. Not the emptiness of boredom, but a much deeper confusion. If I'm doing nothing, then am I nothing? That question silently destroys millions of people every day, not because they lost something essential, but because they forgot that the essential was never in the role. Bataille saw this distortion with burning clarity. To him, the true human is not defined by what they produce, but by what they feel, by what slips through the cracks of function, what overflows from logic. That's why his thought is so disturbing, because it exposes, with cruelty and beauty, how dependent we've become on performance just to believe we exist. It's cruel to realize that without a job or social label, many feel worthless, as if love, tenderness, listening, pain, and imagination weren't worthy of value, as if everything that truly makes us human were too invisible to matter. And yet, it's those things that sustain life, not the position, but the care, not the outcome, but the connection, not the role, but the gesture made for nothing. This existential fragility can't be fixed with formulas or motivational mantras. It demands a deep reconfiguration of how we perceive ourselves, a delicate return to the silent center of being, a place where nothing needs to be done for something to be felt. And it's precisely there that the most difficult rebellion begins. Accepting that existence itself, even silent, even without applause, is already enough. But accepting that takes more than awareness. It takes courage. Because the system surrounding us isn't the hardest to break. The most relentless one is the system we've built inside ourselves. The most rigid prison is internal. And that's the one almost no one talks about. It has no walls, but it has voices. Voices that demand, compare, accuse. Voices that whisper you haven't done enough, that you're not enough, that you still have something to prove. Even when everything around you is silent, they keep screaming inside. It's like there's a constant trial going on, judging every action, every absence, every flaw. And no matter how hard you try to please, the verdict is never acquittal. Only more expectations. This prison feeds on guilt, on anxiety disguised as responsibility, on the urgency to reply to every message, to fill every hour, to not waste a single minute. But what exactly are we trying to make up for with all this action? What are we avoiding when we bury ourselves in tasks? We're running from ourselves, because silence reveals. And often, we're not ready to see what it shows. Bataille didn't offer easy answers. He knew that freedom doesn't begin with a scream. It begins with a plunge. And diving into yourself is terrifying. Because in there, we find not only the forgotten tenderness, but also the masks we've created, the unconscious pacts we've made just to be accepted, the parts of ourselves we abandoned along the way. The internal prison isn't made of concrete. It's made of unconscious agreements. Breaking out doesn't mean quitting everything and fleeing. It means listening, silencing the inner notifications that keep us under surveillance even in solitude. Recognizing that constant productivity is not a virtue. It might just be fear in disguise. Fear of stopping, fear of feeling, fear of seeing yourself. But it's in that silent confrontation that a truer freedom begins to bloom. Not the kind tied to ideologies or declarations, but the one that arises the moment you sit with your own emptiness. And don't judge it. When you breathe without rushing, when you don't respond, when you don't explain, when you simply are. And that's when everything begins again. Because freedom doesn't arrive with fanfare. It doesn't declare itself as an idea. It isn't earned like a trophy. It reveals itself in small gestures. In the moment you walk with no destination. When you look at the sky and feel no guilt. When you choose to waste time on what you love, even if no one understands. The path to freedom isn't heroic. It's intimate. It's subtle. It's often invisible to the world. Georges Bataille was a radical and unsettling French thinker of the 20th century who refused to accept that human life could be reduced to the logic of utility. His works move between philosophy, literature, and mysticism, exploring themes like eroticism, the sacred, and death with a level of intensity few dared to reach. He didn't aim to give answers. He wanted to expose the wounds. He believed that only by passing through absurdity and excess could we reconnect with what is most true in ourselves. Bataille didn't ask for caricatured rebellion. He asked for surrender. He knew that liberation begins in the body, in the senses, in surrendering to the present. That's why the first step is simply to stop. To stop trying to be useful all the time. To stop justifying your own existence. To stop running. To stop and feel. To do something without a purpose. To contemplate without urgency. To breathe without thinking about the next move. These simple gestures are silent revolutions. They break the logic of control. They restore the body's forgotten dignity. They recover a way of being in the world that doesn't demand performance, only presence. Freedom doesn't come through promises or theories. It rises slowly when you allow yourself to simply be. When you realize that you don't need to deserve life to live it. That you don't need to be ready in order to feel. That you don't need to explain yourself in order to exist. And in that moment, you're not just breaking free from the prison, you're discovering it was never real. It was built from the inside, with bricks made of guilt, fear, and pressure. And it can be dismantled in the same way, through small acts of kindness toward yourself. But there is one last challenge, a gesture that can't be taught or forced. It can only be chosen. There comes a point when no theory, no book, no reflection is enough. Only an internal decision can complete this crossing. And that decision isn't about changing the world or convincing anyone. It's about declaring to yourself with the deepest honesty, I didn't come into this world to serve. I came to feel. When this sentence is truly spoken, it's not just an idea, it's a rupture, a point of no return, a silent scream echoing within the inner walls of the soul. Because in speaking it, you abandon the conditioning that kept you obedient. You shatter the mirrors that reflected only what the world wanted to see. And you find yourself, perhaps for the very first time, as someone who no longer needs to justify their existence. The world may keep spinning as it always has, with its demands, its expectations, its noise, but something inside you will have changed, something that can't be erased. Because once you've tasted this radical truth, it stays with you like an invisible presence. A quiet reminder that you already know. You've already felt it. You've already awakened. Bataille understood that the risk of living fully is also the risk of never turning back. Feeling is dangerous. Being whole is frightening, but it's also the most truthful thing there is. And once that flame is lit, no matter how small, it begins to transform everything, slowly burning away everything that was ever a lie. And in the end, maybe the greatest act of defiance is this: to keep feeling, even when everything around you demands obedience.